based strictly on these sources.
It's definitely complex legislation. Stuff like this can, really touch people's everyday lives.
For sure. So let's dive in.
Mm.
Looking at these sources, where do they start with the potential good news? What are the upsides they're highlighting?
Okay, so the sources seem to zoom in first on potential benefits for, specific groups of workers.
Right. And what's the main idea there?
The big one they talk about, especially for hourly folks, is a proposed elimination of federal income tax on tips and overtime pay.
Whoa, no taxes on tips or overtime. That sounds
Yeah.
potentially huge.
It really could be, based on what these articles suggest. Think about servers, delivery drivers, bartenders, anyone getting a lot of tips. They'd keep all of it, federally speaking.
Yeah.
And the sources actually put some numbers on it. They estimate potential savings somewhere around $1,675 to maybe $1,750 a year for the average tipped worker, that is.
$1,600, $1,750.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for people on lower wages or pulling lots of extra hours, that's not small change.
No, definitely not. The sources frame it as, real breathing room financially.
Like rent money or a car payment.
Exactly. Or maybe finally starting that emergency fund. And for overtime, those extra hours suddenly become worth quite a bit more, right, after tax.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one group. Did the sources mention benefits for anyone else? You said seniors earlier.
Yes, that's the other main potential plus highlighted. It's an increase in the standard deduction, but specifically for older Americans who are still filing tax returns.
Okay, an increased deduction for seniors. And what does that translate to, dollar-wise, according to the sources?
The range they give is somewhere between $1,600 and maybe $2,000 saved annually. And, for seniors, often on fixed incomes, that kind of money can really help stretch retirement savings further. Every bit counts.
Right. Now, this is where it gets interesting from a bigger picture perspective. The sources suggest the administration thinks these tax cuts aren't just about helping individuals.
They see it as fuel for the whole economy.
What's the theory there, based on the material you sent?
Well, the projection outlined in these sources is that these changes could potentially spur economic growth by 4 to 5% over the next 4 years.
4 to 5% growth. How?
The thinking is pretty straightforward, as described here.
Mm-hmm.
Put more cash directly into people's pockets.
And I'll spend it.
Exactly. More consumer spending. That boosts demand for, goods and services, which, the theory goes, leads to businesses hiring more people.
Creating jobs, a sort of positive feedback loop.
That's the projected outcome according to this material, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the potential upsides that your sources highlight, but like always with big laws, there's usually another side of the coin. Where do the sources say things get complicated or potentially negative?
Yeah, the sources are pretty clear about the main trade-off here. To pay for those tax cuts we just talked about, the bill proposes some pretty significant cuts to programs that, millions of people depend on right now.
Okay, which programs are we talking about?
The sources specifically name Medicaid and SNAP. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what most people know as food stamps.
Right. Let's start with Medicaid. The sources mention that covers a lot of people.
It really does. Over 70 million Americans, according to the figures here. Low-income families, pregnant women, older adults, people with disabilities. It's a wide net.
And the proposed cuts aren't just about less money.
No, the concerns detailed in these sources go beyond just the dollar amount. They talk about stricter work requirements being added and also making people prove their eligibility much more often.
And the worry is
that
people who qualify now might lose their coverage.
That's the big fear highlighted in the source material, yes. People could lose their health insurance. And the sources bring up a really important related point, the impact on rural areas.
How so?
Apparently, many rural hospitals really rely on Medicaid payments to keep their doors open. So the sources warn that big cuts could actually lead to more of these hospitals closing down.
Creating healthcare deserts. Places where getting medical help is already tough. Wow. Okay, that's a serious concern raised in these sources. What about the SNAP cuts? Food stamps.
The changes described there kind of mirror the Medicaid ones, according to the sources. The main thing is, again, stricter work requirements for people receiving benefits.
And the potential outcome is similar too, I assume.
Yeah, the sources highlight the concern that people who need food assistance could lose it, even if they haven't found a job or their situation hasn't really changed.
Which, for families already struggling,
could be a crisis. That's the worry expressed in the material you sent.
Okay. Are there other maybe more complex changes in the bill mentioned in the sources, things with mixed effects or, weird timing.
Yes, there's also discussion in the sources about changes to something called opportunity zones.
Right, those tax incentives to get investment into certain areas.
Exactly. And the stated goal here, according to the sources, is to try and make sure that investment really goes into struggling rural and poor areas, not places that are already kind of improving.
Sounds reasonable on the surface.
Yeah.
But you said weird timing. What's a catch the sources point out?
The catch is pretty significant. These new, potentially better benefits for investors in those zones, they wouldn't actually start until 2027.
2027.
That's all.
Still a ways off.
It is. And the potential problem the sources flag is that in the short term, investment might actually slow down.
Why? Because investors will just wait.
Potentially, yeah. Wait for the better rules to kick in.
Yeah.
So the very jobs and improvements these zones are supposed to encourage could get delayed for several years in those communities. That's the analysis provided.
Okay, that's definitely a complication. Now, before we move on, we kind of have to address something that always pops up with bills like this, based on the sources you shared. The rumors.
Ah, you mean the chatter about a $5,000 stimulus check?
Oh, that's the one. It's everywhere online.
Uh-huh.
What do the sources you gave us actually say about that? Is there anything to it?
Let's be really, really clear here, based only on the information in these sources. There is currently nothing in the legislation described that mentions these payments. Zero.
There's no $5,000 check.
The sources state there's no confirmed funding for it, no plan for how it would be sent out, nothing official from any government agency, Treasury, IRS, nobody about stimulus checks connected to this specific bill.
Okay, so where is this idea even coming from, according to the sources?
The sources suggest it's likely just speculation. Maybe people thinking the government might save money from those program cuts we talked about and could use it for checks. But they stress it is purely speculation right now.
So the warning for anyone seeing those headlines is?
Pretty stark. The sources basically say, treat those claims with extreme skepticism. Don't make financial plans based on rumors of a check that isn't confirmed.
Right. Wait for official word.
Absolutely. Wait for announcements from actual government sources before you believe it or count on it. It's just too risky otherwise.
That's really crucial advice from the sources.
Yeah.
Okay, let's circle back to the bill itself. Where does it actually stand right now? What's its status, according to this material?
Okay, so like we said, it passed the House. Now the sources say it goes over to the Senate.
And what are its chances there? Smooth sailing.
Not likely, according to the sources. They highlight that it's facing some major challenges in the Senate. Different politics, different priorities over there. Meaning, the sources say it's almost certain to get changed, probably substantially, if it even passes the Senate at all. So the final version, assuming there is one, could look very different from what the House passed. And interestingly, the sources also mentioned that some economists are already questioning that 4 to 5% growth forecast.
Oh, die.
They're citing things like, the potential drag on the economy from cutting those social programs, plus existing issues like restrictive trade policies. They're just not sure it adds up, according to the material.
Okay, so putting this all together now, we've got potential wins for some, potential big losses for others, a lot of uncertainty about the bill's future, plus those stimulus rumors debunked. Based on all of that from your sources, what should you, the listener, maybe be thinking about or doing right now?
Well, the sources offer some tailored advice depending on your situation. For instance, if you earn a lot in tips or work significant overtime, the suggestion is keep really good records of that income, detailed records.
Just in case that tax elimination part actually happens, so you can take full advantage.
Exactly. Be prepared. And maybe, the sources suggest, think about talking to a tax professional. See how this potential change fits into your overall tax picture.
Okay. What about people who are on Medicaid or SNAP or might need them?
That's obviously a really critical group. The sources stress, first, stay informed about the bill's progress, but maybe even more importantly,
Yes.
consider talking to a benefits advisor or maybe a social worker now. Don't wait.
Why now?
So you can understand how these proposed changes, like stricter work rules or eligibility checks, might affect your specific situation. The sources say it's about preparing proactively, not getting caught off guard if cuts happen.
Got it. Proactive preparation. And for seniors who might get that bigger standard deduction.
The advice there is that this could be a good time to just review your overall retirement tax planning, especially if you have other taxable income besides, say, Social Security.
Because the deduction change could shift things around.
Right. It might change your total tax liability. A tax pro could help figure that out.
Okay. Is there a, one piece of advice from the sources that applies to everybody, no matter their situation.
Absolutely. The number one thing stressed across all the material you sent is stay informed, but use reliable sources.
Not just social media posts about stimulus checks.
Definitely not. Check official government websites. Talk to actual financial professionals. The sources really emphasize making decisions based on facts, not rumors, especially when it's about your money.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been a real deep dive based on the sources you sent. We've seen the potential pluses, the potential minuses, tackled the rumors, looked at where the bill stands, which is pretty uncertain.
Yeah, the uncertainty is a key takeaway from the sources themselves. We just won't know the final impact until, if and when a bill actually makes it all the way through Congress and gets signed.
But the core idea, the policy direction described in the sources, is clear, isn't it? It seems to be about prioritizing tax cuts for some workers,
While potentially cutting back on major social programs to pay for it.
which, as the sources frame it, creates definite winners and losers, depending on your circumstances.
Precisely. The sources present it as a significant policy shift. And whether you agree with that direction or not, the potential changes discussed are real and could have very meaningful consequences for people's finances.
And the sources mention timing, too. Even if it passes, changes aren't instant.
Correct. Tax changes usually kick in for the next tax year, based on what the sources say. And benefit program changes often have transition periods built in.
But the advice is still to prepare now.
Yes. If you think you might be affected, the sources suggest understanding the possibilities now is the best approach.
Knowledge really is power here, isn't it? Understanding how this stuff could impact your wallet.
It truly is. And I think the sources you provided today really hammered that home. Staying informed, using good sources, that's the best thing you can do to protect your financial future, maybe even improve it.
Well, thanks again to our listener for sending all this material over. It gave us a lot to chew on.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe one final thought, just reflecting on the themes in these sources. Think about how different approaches to boosting the economy, like tax cuts versus, say, strengthening social safety nets, really reflect different ideas about whose financial health matters most for the country's overall prosperity. It's something that will likely keep shaping these policy debates going forward.
Absolutely, something to think about. Until next time, stay informed and keep digging deeper. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something, well, pretty significant. A big economic bill that just got through the House.
And yeah, we've got a listener to thank for sending over quite a bit of source material on this one. Articles, notes, the works.
Absolutely. So our job today is to comb through all this information you sent and pull out the really key stuff. Cut through the noise, figure out what this bill might mean for your money, all based strictly on these sources.
It's definitely complex legislation. Stuff like this can, really touch people's everyday lives.
For sure. So let's dive in. Looking at these sources, where do they start with the potential good news? What are the upsides they're highlighting?
Okay, so the sources seem to zoom in first on potential benefits for, specific groups of workers.
Right. And what's the main idea there?
The big one they talk about, especially for hourly folks, is a proposed elimination